So the last unit we were talking about is this one, the Roman Empire. So this was almost a 800-year span of time where, remember, Rome goes from being a little city on the Tiber River to taking over most of Europe, North Africa, as well as parts of the Middle East. This was a very advanced time, ruled under a unified government of a single emperor. Remember, started with Julius Caesar and then continued with Augustus and then the rest of the Caesars. And they had the Pax Romana, where they really supported the arts and public works and technology, and this was a really stable and prosperous time. Well, remember, in the mid-400s is when the Germanic tribes finally came in and removed the last Caesar, the last Roman emperor. And within about 100 years, we move into something that historians call the medieval era. Medieval is just a term that means the middle years. And so this is what we use to refer to this time that is right after the fall of the Roman Empire, but before the Renaissance. So we have like a really advanced civilization on one side, which is Rome. We have a really advanced civilization towards the end of this, which is the Renaissance. And yet we have this middle years where they kind of take a step back. And that is the medieval Western Europe that we're going to be talking about. So what we're trying to figure out in this lecture is how do we go from the most advanced and unified society on Earth, which was the Roman Empire, to this thing called medieval Europe, or the Dark Ages, in less than 100 years. So please write this down. This is our new unit. Actually it should be Unit 3, Medieval Europe. So remember, all these places that we're talking about are occurring at the same time. The last thing we discussed was Byzantium. So remember, Byzantium was Eastern Rome, the part that survived on after Western Rome fell. So now we're trying to figure out what's going on in the West. While Byzantium is really wealthy, what's going on over there in the West, the part that ended up falling? Well, first let's characterize what the medieval era was for Europe. So please write this down. Generally, we refer to the years of 478 CE, which was when the last Roman emperor was removed from the throne, to about 1400 CE, which would have been the time of the Renaissance beginning. This is what we refer to as the medieval era, or medieval Europe, also known as the Dark Ages. And this is when the Roman Empire ends up falling. And with the Germanic tribes coming in, because most of them are illiterate, most of them cannot read, don't have a written language, their education or value on education ends up going away. And the majority of people in Western Rome become very illiterate, which is very different than when it was the Roman Empire. Under Rome, the majority of people had access to education. Most of them could read. And so in medieval Western Europe, which used to be Western Rome, we have a decrease in education. Nobody cares anymore. And one of the reasons they don't care is because they're not interacting with the outside world very much. Remember, Rome had the Roman road system, which allowed for fast movement and trade. Well, once Rome fell, it became a very violent society. We had all these Germanic tribes that were fighting with each other, and so it was not safe any longer to trade. The roads fell into disrepair. The Germanic kings were all broken up and fighting each other, so they weren't paying to maintain the Roman roads. So trade almost completely vanishes in Western Europe in the medieval Europe, era. Instead, most people return back to the land, and the majority of people go from the big Roman cities into the countryside, and most of them are forced to farm or participate in agriculture. Also, during this time, remember, we no longer are unified under a single emperor like Julius Caesar. Instead, each one of these Germanic tribes came in and they carved out or claimed a piece of Western Europe for themselves. And they established these little kingdoms. So since we have so many different kingdoms, hundreds and hundreds of them, and we don't have a single ruler, we have a whole bunch of kings, but each king is not powerful. They're very weak. And in fact, the most powerful person in all of Western Europe during this time is actually the head of the church, the Pope. So remember, during the Roman Empire, Christianity spread and eventually becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. So the majority of people in Europe are Christian. So they all recognize the same religion, which means they all recognize the Pope, but none of them really recognize the same king, which means the Pope becomes the most powerful person because everybody recognizes the Pope even if they have different political leaders or different kings. So because of these things, we call this the Dark Ages because it's supposed to be this time of people not being enlightened, no advancements, no technology, no cities, no trade, no interaction. So this is the Dark Era. So what ends up causing the medieval era? Well, like I said, Western Rome ends up falling to the Germanic tribes. Each of these Germanic tribes, so remember we have the Goths and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the Anglos and the Saxons, all these different Goths coming in. They each come in and they carve out a little region of land. And so they establish their own little tribal kingdoms where they have their chief end up becoming a king for that little region. So you can see here, Rome was a big unified empire like you saw in our map activity. And then by about 1000, look here, you have hundreds of these little itty-bitty kingdoms, and each one has their own king. And so it's very, very disunified. So you had like the Franks come in, they're a Germanic tribe, and they established the kingdom of the Franks here. We have the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths come in here and settle into Spain, and each of them establish their own kingdom. So we have a lot of little kingdoms, and they're all kind of conflicting with each other, and there's a lot of war and a lot of violence. And this is really going to be a big theme of this unit, so I hope you're ready to talk about fighting and wars and violence, because there's a lot of that happening in this unit. Alright guys, so this is just laying the foundation. So I just wanted you to know when we refer to the medieval era, what are we talking about? How was it different from the Roman Empire? And especially geographically, how was it different from the Roman Empire? And why was it that way? So if you need to watch this again, please do so and let me know if you have any questions.